I can't unfold it, it'll last 40 minutes. If I have it, it'll last 20. Blessed are the meek. There's something within many people that will not let them believe this verse. The meek inherit the earth? Impossible, they say. Absurd. The statement of a dreamer, and especially in our day and time, we quarrel with this because power is the thing. If we build a much superior atomic bomb to Russia, then we're ahead. If we buy a car that's more powerful than the neighbors, then we're ahead. Power is really important. My car must have the horsepower of a Greyhound bus or I'm not happy. Power is very, very important. And in business, the ones that do it are the powerful ones, the go-getters, the aggressive ones, the ones that make things happen, not the meek, the bold and the brazen. Listen, I had this brought home to me how people think. When I was in Stanton, I was invited to the men's club that had breakfast every morning, and they especially wanted me to come, and there was one empty chair when I got there, and it was right by this lawyer. And as I was sitting down, before I got to my seat, he said in a very loud voice, "The meek inherit the earth? That's dumb. Who would think that? It's the powerful that inherit the earth." That's a crazy scripture. I'll tell you how I answered it in a minute, because my deacons and all were there watching to see what would happen. So it was sort of a defining moment in my ministry. But I'll tell you in just a minute, and part of it is how I answered it that's in this sermon. You see, the meek we define as weak. As meek as a lamb, as meek as a mouse. You remember Casper Milquetoast? Some of you older will. It was a comic strip about a man that was very, very, they would call him meek. And one day somebody said to him, "Are you a man or a mouse? Squeak up. We want to hear." This is the view we got from the comic strips, from everyone, that if you were meek, you were somebody that some people just walked all over. Well, let me tell you, words change in meaning through the centuries. For instance, if you have an old King James Bible, the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians does not say love, it says charity. Y'all familiar with that? Faith, hope, and charity it ends. Because that's what the word meant in 1611. See, words change. They have life, they grow, they develop. They mean different things in our time than back there. So let me tell you what meek meant when Christ said it. And this is what we need to know. Meek, well, let me tell you how much words have changed. I have a little story here that I think is too good not to use. The Great Fire of London was in the 1600s. A great many of the churches were burned up, and most of the people didn't have any place to stay. The homes were wooden, most of them, and it was a terrible fire. Well, St. Paul's Cathedral burned along with the others, and Sir Christopher Wren was asked to rebuild it. A great name, and he spent 35 years rebuilding St. Paul's. He went, as I understand, every day to be sure it was made just right. If you've ever been in it, you know it's a glorious building. Well, after 35 years, it was finished, and the Queen came to see it, Queen Anne. And they took her all over the cathedral. They explained what different things were and how they were done. And finally, that was over. and she gave her opinion of it to Christopher Wren. She said, I think it's awful, I think it's amusing, and I think it's artificial. And he bowed down and thanked her. Because in that day and time, awful meant awe-inspiring, amusing meant amazing, and artificial meant artistic. See how the words change? Well, this word has changed a lot too. It originally meant, and Aristotle and Plato both used it, by the way. It's that old. It's before Christ, it was in the Greek language. It means someone who has great power but can control it. I had a deacon in Bunnell that was almost my height, but about this broad. And it was shoulders, not stomach. And he would wrestle with those bulls and get the cattle in the right place. And he could have broken me in two like a stick. He was a powerful man. He was, my wife knows, one of the kindest persons I ever knew. That's meekness. When you have the power, when you have the intellect that you can put people down and make them feel bad, but you don't. You use your power to lift them, not destroy them. That's meekness. Meekness is being able to control your power. Aristotle put it like this. With your anger, that sometimes flares up, you know. The meek man is the one that isn't angry all the time or not angry all the time. He's somewhere appropriate. Christ was like that, wasn't he? In the temple, he was pretty mad. That's meekness. That's to say, I am powerful, but I'm not going to use it against you. Plato gave another one, and then I'll quit with these definitions. But Plato said, meekness is like two great horses of immense power who are bridled together and pull a chariot. That's great power, but they're not just running all over. The power is focused. Now, see, you get the feeling? This is what Christ said. Those who follow me will be meek, and they will inherit the earth. They will have the power, but they will use it for good and not to destroy people or things. Okay, you can't beat that, can you? So the highest strength is to be able to control our own power. In other words, we conquer ourselves. If you can do that. I mean, haven't you before said, you get home and you got mad at somebody, you said, oh, I wished I hadn't said that. Oh, I wished I hadn't done that. And this is what it's talking about. What you have is controlled, of course, by Christ. So this is what we're talking about, and this is what I said to the lawyer while he was shouting on about what a dumb verse. How can anybody believe that? I explained to him just what I told you about Plato and the bridled horses, and he kept getting louder, and I kept explaining this, and finally he realized he wasn't very controlled. When he was out of control at a breakfast meeting, almost shouting at me, what a dumb verse, what a dumb... Well, it's people that can control themselves, Christ is talking about. Not the power, the control. And finally he got it and quit talking. He didn't talk the rest of the meal. And I was so glad I had stayed awake in seminary when this was taught. Because I'd have to go back and face my deacons like a whipped dog if I hadn't known it. It would have really been bad. I'm always thankful for that, and the professors that taught me Greek and showed that. But how do you control yourself? I mean, it's easy for me to say, control yourself, and your answer should be how? Well, Paul, you know, was a pretty strong person. Persecuted Christians. I mean, he went after them. There was murder, there was blood on his hand. He had overwhelmed them. And Paul said, the love of Christ controls us. That was his. He had found the love of God in Christ, and he didn't want to embarrass either one of them. And so he tamed his intellect and all of his power. Someone has said, and I love this quote, the only cure for the love of power is the power of love. Let me say that again. That's worth writing on the back of your hand. The only cure for the love of power is the power of love. And that's what Paul and the other apostles found, that it was the love of Christ in them that controlled them. Because, you know, we all want power. Now, let's not kid ourselves. In some areas, I mean, we want to be known as, or we want to be known as the one who, we have a lot. But haven't you said to yourself, man, if I were just in Washington, I'd straighten this mess out. Give me the power, and let me show you what I can do. The apostles felt that. James and John, you know, they said, why don't you destroy this city? They didn't like us. Well, Christ could have. And that wasn't his. He was going to let meekness, which can also be interpreted gentleness, be the thing. And he didn't destroy it. But the apostle said, let's see you nuke that city. This is going to be wonderful. We'll show them who has power. They think they can treat us like that? Okay, so here we go. A meek person is Christ-like, who would rather suffer wrong than do wrong. He's controlled by the love of Christ. He's not one that gets run over. The two strongest men in the Bible are called meek, Christ and Moses. My goodness. Moses, weak. You remember he killed an Egyptian with his bare hands. That doesn't sound very meek to me. It had to leave. And then God worked on him on the back of the desert. Great place to find God. And then he went and faced the most powerful man on earth and said, let my people go. Pharaoh. Egypt was top then. Pharaoh was the most powerful man. You can't say he was meek, but you can say he was controlled when he went there. Okay, so we've got that. And Christ, think how strong Christ was. A mob appeared with him teaching and threw this poor woman down in front of him and said, she's caught in the act of adultery, and we want to see her stoned. That's really what they said. And he stood up against them all, and she walked out a forgiven person. Now that's meekness. He could have, the British did it's the best thing, they did a life of Christ in movies. And they were showing parts of how other people depicted it. And Christ was in the temple, and one of the lawyers, the man of the law, said to him, show us a miracle. And Christ said, you want me to bring down lightning right where you're standing? The man said, no, that's not what I meant. But they put some humor in it, and that's true. Christ could have done that. He didn't. He decided to die in meekness rather than destroy in pride. And that's what he did. So Jesus was not milquetoast. He was not someone that people just ran over. He was strong. Do any of you remember, now this is going back into the 70s. Do you remember Norm Evans, who played for the Dolphins? Number 73. He spoke in our church when I was down in Miami. And he was a bit taller than I am, a good bit broader than I am, not an ounce of fat on him, and he weighed 275 pounds, which was beginning to get small then for a tackle. And Bubba was the one that played across from him, he had to block. And the crowd would always scream, "Kill, Bubba, kill." I mean, he was a man. And some people would say things like, they have to keep him in a cage before they let him play. He's so dangerous. Things like that. Well, Norm, and he weighed about 300 pounds. Norm was 275 and lined up nose to nose with him. And he handled him. Now that was power control. I mean, he could do it. And as a Christian, he could say that Christ controlled his life. I heard of a big labor dispute. In fact, I read about it. And the leader of management went down to talk to the men that were striking. And one of them spit right in his face. And everything stopped. He took his handkerchief out, wiped it off, smiled at the man, and left. And later, that man came to see him and said, "How could you do that? How could you walk away with a smile?" And he got to witness to him that Christ is the one that controls my life. That's meekness. He had the power to do a lot of things, and he didn't. He was meek. He was gentle. Now, to show you that Christ was not meek is another interesting thing. When they came to arrest him, they brought 200 soldiers with swords for one man who had never hurt anybody. That's being afraid. You're afraid of people that have that kind of power and can control it. And of course, Simon Peter did the only thing he knew what to do. He cut a man's ear off, and Christ healed him and said, "That's not what we're here about. We're here to do the will of God, and my dying is part of it. And I accept that, and I'll control my power for everything else. My power is to do the will of God." Now, I want you to notice the verse, the part of it you just may have overlooked. It said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." It didn't say they shall take the earth over. It didn't say they'll beat everybody else up, destroy other nations. It said they will inherit it. St. Francis of Assisi really gave us some insight into this. He said there are two big questions people ought to ask. One is, who are you, God? And who am I? He said if you can answer those two questions, then you're on your way spiritually. And the answer to it is, who are you, God? He's our Father. And who are we? We're his children. And children inherit from the Father. And the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And when the time is right, the meek, his followers, will inherit the earth. Because it's his to give and ours to receive. I want to tell you, too, people sometimes recognize meekness as greatness. Several years ago, the French people were asked to vote for the most popular, the most important man that had lived in France. Guess who won? It wasn't Napoleon, because they could remember that from France to Russia, he had left a trail of widows and orphan children with the thousands of men that his troops killed, so that he, Napoleon, could rule the world. Instead, they voted for Pasteur. The man who helped so many through his science and his meekness. Isn't that interesting? So the question today is, who controls your life? Listen, you have big decisions to make. What's behind your decision? Well, what can I get out of this? Or how powerful can I be? Or how much? What about the will of God? What about, like Paul said, how about, let's say, the love of Christ will control me? I found a love in him like no one else had, and I will live with him and for him. And young people, when you go to pick your husband in a very few years, now how old are you all now? How old? 13, 14? Okay. About 7 years, you will have decided where you're going to school, who you're going to marry, what you're going to do in life. That's an important time, these next few years. You need the love of Christ controlling it and not just saying, I want that and I want that and he looks good and he... Really, I'm serious. It's true for all of us. The love of Christ has to really control us or we'll make some real dumb decisions. And why God? Well, let me tell you, my friend who's now dead, one of the great preachers in our convention, John Claypool, told it. This happened to him. It was the summer, and they were out of college, and his cousin said, "Why don't we go to Florida?" Well, you know, when you're that age, let's go to Florida. I'm getting in the car. So they drove down, and the old Chevy the man had just wouldn't run right. It just wouldn't. They stopped and asked people, and nothing happened. They got to Daytona Beach, and they pulled into the big Chevy place there, and they got all the mechanics got interested in it. They couldn't make the thing run right. And they were Chevy mechanics. And there was an old man standing out beside the wall watching them with a little amusement. He was watching what they were trying and all. And finally, he walked over to the car and said, could I try it? They said, you can try anything. We can't do it. And he tinkered on the engine and he just started purring. And they said to him, how did you know how to fix this thing? He said, I designed it when I worked for Chevy. Well, when it comes to you and running your life, you ought to go to the person who designed it. And that's God. And he also loves you. And walk with him. This is a great day to start. It really is. You have your life ahead. Who knows what's tomorrow? But though you can't know that, you can know who will be with you tomorrow to make the decisions in all that you should make. And so I ask you to open your heart and life to Christ. He came because he loved you. He came with power to change your life, and he also knows you. And so I ask you now, some of you need to join a church and become part of the family of God here. Some of you just need to claim the Godship, the Fathership of God and Christ. And you need to come and start a new life. And I invite you to come as we sing our hymn of invitation. There will be some of us at the front to meet you with joy.